My name is Erica Thompson, and at 27 years old, I never expected to be fighting for what was rightfully mine. When I was 5, my dad walked out of my life to start a new family, leaving me with my grandmother Margaret. For 22 years, I barely existed in his world until his sudden death revealed I was named in his will. Now, his second wife Stephanie is threatening legal action to take my inheritance. Before I tell you how this all unfolded, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe to join me on this journey. I still remember those early days with both my parents so clearly. I was born in a small town in Wisconsin where we lived in a modest 2-bedroom house with blue shutters and a tire swing in the front yard. My mom, Sarah, was a kindergarten teacher with a smile that could light up a room. My dad, James, worked as an accountant at a local firm. We weren't rich, but we were happy. Some of my favorite memories are from when I was 3 and 4 years old. Dad would swing me around in circles in our backyard until we both collapsed on the grass in fits of laughter. Mom would read to me every night, doing different voices for each character. On weekends, we'd go for picnics by Lake Michigan, and Dad would teach me how to skip stones across the water. Everything changed when I was 4. Mom started getting these terrible headaches. At first, she tried to hide it from me, but soon she was too sick to pretend. I remember sitting in the doctor's office with my coloring book while my parents received the news. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew it was bad from the way my mom's hand trembled in my dad's. The diagnosis was aggressive brain cancer. The doctors gave her less than a year. Dad was devastated but stepped up at first. He would work all day, then come home and take care of both Mom and me. He learned to cook simple meals, do laundry, and even braid my hair for kindergarten, though never as neatly as Mom did. As Mom got sicker, we spent more time at the hospital. I remember the sterile smell, the beeping machines, and how Mom seemed to shrink into the white hospital bed. Even then, she always had a smile for me. The last coherent conversation I had with her, she held my hand and said, "Erica, my sweet girl, always remember how much Mommy loves you. Be brave and kind, and know that I'll always be watching over you." She passed away 2 weeks later, just after my 4th birthday. At the funeral, Dad held my hand so tight it hurt, but I didn't complain. I thought we would face this together. For the first couple of months, Dad tried his best. He would make me breakfast, take me to kindergarten, and tuck me in at night. But he was drowning in grief and struggling with being a single parent. He started staying later at work. Sometimes our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, would watch me until he came home. Then came the business conference in Chicago. Dad was gone for 3 days, and when he returned, something had changed. He seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted. That's when he first mentioned Stephanie. He'd met her at the conference where she was representing another accounting firm. She lived in California, but they had connected instantly. Their relationship moved at warp speed. They spoke on the phone every night after I went to bed. Sometimes I'd wake up and hear Dad laughing in a way he hadn't since Mom died. 2 months after they met, Stephanie flew to Wisconsin for a weekend. I remember her perfectly manicured nails, designer clothes, and the way she awkwardly patted my head instead of hugging me. A week after her visit, Dad sat me down at our kitchen table. I was playing with my cereal, making little whirlpools with my spoon. "Erica, honey, I have some exciting news," he said, his eyes brighter than I'd seen in months. "Stephanie and I are getting married, and I'm going to move to California to be with her." My 5-year-old brain couldn't process this. "Are we moving to California?" I asked. Dad's smile faltered. "Well, sweetheart, here's the thing. Stephanie and I need some time to get settled first. We're buying a new house and she's helping me find a job at her firm. Once everything is ready, I'll come back for you." "How long will that be?" I asked, my lower lip starting to tremble. "Not too long," he promised. "Just a few months. In the meantime, you'll stay with Grandma Margaret. You love spending time with Grandma, right?" I nodded because it was true. My mom's mother was my favorite person after my parents. But the thought of Dad leaving too so soon after Mom filled me with a dread I couldn't articulate at that age. A week later, Dad packed our minivan with his clothes and a few personal items. He drove me to Grandma Margaret's small house 2 towns over. I remember clutching my stuffed rabbit, Mr. Flopsy, as Dad carried my small suitcase to the door. Grandma hugged me tight, her perfume smelling of lavender and safety. Dad knelt down to my level. "Be good for Grandma. Okay, I'll call you every week, and before you know it, I'll be back to get you." He hugged me, and I clung to him desperately. "Promise you'll come back," I whispered into his shoulder. "Of course, Erica. You're my little girl. I promise." I watched from Grandma's front window as he drove away, not knowing that this temporary arrangement would define the rest of my childhood. The first few nights at Grandma Margaret's house, I couldn't sleep. I would sit by the window in the little guest room that had become mine, watching for headlights, convinced each car that passed might be Dad coming back. Grandma would find me there sometimes, asleep with my forehead pressed against the cool glass, and gently guide me back to bed. "Your daddy needs time, Erica," she would say, tucking the blankets around me. "But you and me, we're going to be just fine." Grandma Margaret was nothing if not resilient. At 62, she'd already weathered the loss of her husband to a heart attack, and now her only daughter to cancer. She was a retired high school English teacher, with a modest pension, living in a small 2-bedroom house filled with books and memories. She was tall and straight-backed, with silver hair she kept in a neat bob. Her hands were always busy, cooking, gardening, grading papers for the tutoring she did to supplement her income. She wasn't naturally affectionate like my mom had been, but her love showed in other ways: the way she never missed a school event, how she taught me to make perfect pancakes on Sunday mornings, the pride in her voice when I brought home good grades. Our life together was simple but structured. Grandma believed in routines. Breakfast at 7, homework immediately after school, dinner at 6, reading before bed. Money was tight. I quickly learned that the things other kids took for granted were special occasions for us. New clothes came from thrift stores, vacations were day trips to free museums or parks, and treats were homemade cookies rather than store-bought. At first, Dad called every Sunday night at 7. I would count the days, hours, minutes until I could hear his voice. He would ask about school and tell me about California, the sunshine, the ocean, his new job. He always ended with, "Just a little longer, Erica. We're almost ready for you." For my 6th birthday, a card arrived with a $20 bill and a promise to visit soon. The same for Christmas. By the time I turned 7, the calls had dwindled to once a month. When I was 8, another birthday card came with $20, but no call. After that, communication became sporadic at best. A card at Christmas, occasionally on my birthday, but the promised visit never materialized. I was 9 when I first saw pictures of Dad's new life. Grandma's friend Barbara came over for coffee and mentioned seeing photos on that Facebook thing of James with his new baby. When they realized I was listening from the hallway, they quickly changed the subject, but the damage was done. That night, after Grandma went to bed, I snuck onto her ancient desktop computer and found Dad's Facebook page. There he was, smiling broadly with his arm around Stephanie, who was holding a baby boy. The caption read, "Welcoming Zachary James Thompson to the family." There were dozens of congratulatory comments, including one from Dad that said, "Our family is now complete." I remember staring at those words until they blurred through my tears. Complete. How could his family be complete without me? Over the next few years, I watched from afar as Dad's new family grew. A daughter, Lily, came 2 years after Zach. There were photos of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family vacations to Disneyland and Hawaii, all experiences I would never share with him. Each milestone they celebrated was another reminder of my exclusion from his life. School became both an escape and a challenge. When other kids talked about their parents or brought their dads to career day, I felt the absence of mine like a physical pain. Mother's Day projects were the worst. My teachers always awkwardly suggested I make mine for Grandma instead. "She's raised 3 children now," my 3rd-grade teacher said kindly, not realizing how her words stung. "First your mother, then your uncle, and now you." I had classmates who pitied me and others who teased me. "Your dad didn't want you," a girl named Bridget taunted during 4th-grade recess. "That's why he left you behind." Through it all, Grandma was my rock. When I came home crying that day, she sat me down at the kitchen table with a mug of hot chocolate. "Listen to me, Erica Thompson," she said firmly. "Your worth is not determined by who stays or who leaves. You are smart, kind, and stronger than you know. Some people aren't capable of being who we need them to be, and that's their failing, not yours." As I grew older, I took her words to heart. I threw myself into schoolwork, determined to make Grandma proud. She had sacrificed so much to raise me, taking on extra tutoring students despite her arthritis sewing my clothes when she could have been resting, never once complaining about the unexpected burden of raising another child in her 60s. When I was 10, Grandma enrolled me in the community center's art class after noticing how I loved to draw. She couldn't afford the fee, so she bartered by tutoring the director's son in English. For my 12th birthday, she saved for months to buy me a second-hand bicycle, even though it meant she went without new reading glasses she desperately needed. Those years shaped me in ways I'm still discovering. Grandma taught me resilience, the value of education, and how to find joy in small things. Most importantly, she showed me what unconditional love looked like, not through grand gestures or promises, but through showing up day after day, no matter how difficult. By the time I was 12, Grandma Margaret had become more than my guardian. She was my parent in every way that mattered. The bond between us was unbreakable, forged through shared struggles and quiet triumphs. While Dad built his new life 3,000 miles away, Grandma and I built ours right there in that small Wisconsin house, one day at a time. When I turned 13, I decided to reach out to Dad myself. Grandma had finally upgraded to a basic smartphone, and I used her email account to send him a message. It took me 3 days to write it, agonizing over every word. "Dear Dad," I wrote. "I hope you're doing well. I'm in 8th grade now and got straight A's this semester. Grandma says I take after Mom that way. I was wondering if maybe I could visit you in California sometime, or maybe you could visit us. I'd really like to meet my brother and sister. Love, Erica." 2 weeks passed before he responded. His reply was friendly but vague. "Great to hear from you, Erica. So proud of those grades. Things are hectic here with Zach starting school and Lily in the terrible twos, but we'll definitely try to work something out soon. Love, Dad." That soon stretched indefinitely. For my 14th birthday, he actually called. The conversation was awkward with long pauses and surface-level questions. "How's school?" he asked. "It's good. I'm taking advanced math now." "That's great. You get that from me, you know. I was always good with numbers." He didn't seem to remember that I had inherited my mom's love of literature, not his aptitude for math. In fact, I was struggling in that class, but excelling in English just like Grandma. The most painful moment came when he asked, "Are you still doing that dance thing?" I had never taken dance lessons. That was Lily, his other daughter, the one he actually knew. After 15 uncomfortable minutes, he said he had to go. Zach had a soccer game. He promised to call again soon. He didn't. The Christmas I was 15, I saw on Instagram that Dad had bought Zach a gaming system and Lily a new bike. My gift arrived 2 weeks late, a generic $50 gift card to a clothing store that didn't have branches in Wisconsin. The following spring, Grandma and I were having dinner when she casually mentioned, "I saw online that your father got a promotion. He's a senior partner now." I nodded, pushing my peas around my plate. We rarely discussed Dad, but I knew Grandma kept tabs on him, perhaps hoping he would eventually step up. "You know," she continued carefully, "he does send some money for your care. Not much and not regularly, but something." This was news to me. "Then why are you still tutoring when your hands hurt so much? Why did we have to skip getting my wisdom teeth out last year?" Grandma sighed. "What he sends barely covers groceries, Erica. And I put most of it aside for your college fund." That night, I looked up the salary range for senior partners at major accounting firms. The numbers made me feel sick. While Grandma and I pinched pennies, clipped coupons, and delayed medical care, Dad was living in luxury. When I was 16, I saw Instagram photos of Lily's sweet 16 party. Dad had rented out an entire restaurant and bought her a car, a brand new Jeep with a big red bow on top. I spent my 16th birthday working a double shift at the local grocery store where I'd started as a bagger. I was saving for a laptop for college applications. That same year, I began seriously dating a boy named Mark from my chemistry class. He came from a normal family, 2 parents who attended every school function and family dinners every night. The first time he asked why I never talked about my dad, I broke down in tears. To his credit, he listened without judgment as I poured out the whole story. "That's messed up," was his simple response. "But his loss, you know, you're amazing." Our relationship lasted 8 months before falling apart. The truth was, I couldn't fully trust his affection. If my own father could walk away so easily, How could I believe anyone would stay? When I was 17, Grandma Margaret suffered a minor stroke. I found her one morning at the kitchen table, her coffee cup tipped over, her speech slurred. The next 3 months were a blur of hospital visits, therapy appointments, and learning to be her caregiver. I took on more hours at the grocery store while maintaining my grades. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My routine became school from 8 to 3, work from 4 to 8, home to make dinner for Grandma, homework until midnight, then up at 6 to start again. The one bright spot was my English teacher, Ms. Winters. She noticed my exhaustion and asked me to stay after class one day. "Erica, is everything all right at home?" she asked gently. Before I knew it, I was telling her everything. Grandma's stroke, our financial struggles, my fear of not getting into college. To my surprise, she didn't offer empty platitudes. "You need practical help," she said, "not just sympathy." She connected me with scholarship opportunities, wrote me a glowing recommendation letter, and sometimes even brought an extra lunch by accident that she insisted I take. By my senior year, Grandma had recovered enough to manage basic tasks, but she moved more slowly and tired easily. I applied to a dozen colleges, focusing on those with generous financial aid. When the acceptance letter from the state university came with a partial scholarship, we celebrated with ice cream sundaes at our kitchen table. My high school graduation was bittersweet. As I sat in my cap and gown, I couldn't help scanning the audience, some small childish part of me still hoping Dad might appear. He didn't, of course, but Grandma was there in the front row, proudly dabbing at her eyes, and Ms. Winters cheered so loudly when my name was called that I couldn't help but smile. That night, Grandma gave me a small box. Inside was my mother's college ring. "She would be so proud of you," Grandma said, her voice thick with emotion. "And so am I." I hugged her tightly, feeling both the sharp ache of all I had lost and deep gratitude for what remained. I chose to attend the state university while living at home with Grandma. The scholarship covered about half my tuition, but books, fees, and living expenses still had to be paid somehow. I juggled 3 part-time jobs, mornings at a campus coffee shop, evenings at the library, and weekend shifts at my old grocery store job. My accounting major wasn't chosen out of passion, but practicality. I wanted financial security, something I'd never known growing up. The irony that I was following in my father's professional footsteps wasn't lost on me. Despite my busy schedule, I managed to maintain a 3.8 GPA. I studied on bus rides, between jobs, during lunch breaks, and late into the night. When classmates complained about having to work 20 hours a week, I kept quiet about my 40-plus-hour schedule. The highlight of my college years was meeting Jess and Aiden in my sophomore accounting seminar. They were the first friends who truly felt like family. Jess was a whirlwind of energy who spoke a mile a minute and color-coded her planner. Aiden was quieter, with a dry sense of humor and an uncanny ability to explain complex concepts. When they learned about my situation, they folded me into their lives without hesitation. "You're coming to Sunday dinner," Jess announced one day. "My mom makes enough lasagna to feed an army, and she's dying to meet you." Soon I was spending most Sundays with Jess's large, boisterous family. Her parents treated me like another daughter. Her younger siblings adopted me as an extra sister. And for those few hours each week, I experienced what a normal family felt like. Aiden, meanwhile, became my study partner and confidant. His own parents had divorced when he was 12, so he understood some of my abandonment issues. "The thing is," he told me once, "their choices reflect on them, not on you. Never on you." Grandma was delighted that I'd found such good friends. "Bring them over," she insisted, though our house was small and shabby compared to their homes. When they came for dinner, Grandma charmed them with stories from her teaching days and her sharp observations about literature. "Your grandmother is awesome," Aiden said afterward. "I see where you get your strength." By my junior year, Grandma's health began deteriorating again. She tired more easily and had trouble remembering small things. I cut back on my library hours to spend more time at home helping with medications and doctor's appointments. One night, after a particularly difficult day where she'd fallen trying to reach a book on a high shelf, I found her sitting in her rocking chair, looking through an old photo album. "Come sit with me, Erica," she said, patting the ottoman beside her. The album was open to my mother's wedding day. There was Dad looking young and nervous and happy, nothing like the distant figure he'd become. "I don't hate him, you know," Grandma said, following my gaze. "I used to for abandoning you. But hate is too heavy to carry for so long. I mostly feel sad for him." "Sad why?" I asked, surprised. "Because he missed watching you grow into this remarkable person," she said, squeezing my hand. "That's a loss he'll never even fully understand." 2 months later, Grandma had a severe stroke. I was in the middle of finals when I got the call from our neighbor who'd found her unconscious. At the hospital, the doctors were grim. "She's stabilized, but there's been significant brain damage," the neurologist explained. "You should prepare yourself for difficult decisions ahead." For 3 days, I barely left her hospital room, sleeping in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, studying for finals by the dim light above her bed. On the 4th day, she regained consciousness briefly. "Erica," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I leaned close, holding her frail hand. "I'm here, Grandma." "Promise me," she said with effort. "Promise you'll finish school. Follow your dreams. Don't let anything hold you back." "I promise," I said, tears streaming down my face. "But you'll be there at graduation, right? Like we planned?" She smiled faintly and squeezed my hand. It was the last coherent conversation we had. A week later, she slipped into a coma and passed away peacefully in her sleep. I was 21 years old and completely alone. The funeral was small. Grandma's few remaining friends, some of her former students, Jess and Aiden with their families, and Ms. Winters from high school. I sent Dad an email notifying him of his mother-in-law's death. He replied with a brief message of condolence and a $100 contribution toward funeral expenses. The months that followed were the darkest of my life. I moved into a tiny studio apartment I could barely afford, threw myself into my senior year coursework, and increased my work hours to make ends meet. Some days, grief hit me so hard I could barely get out of bed, but I had made a promise to Grandma, and I intended to keep it. When graduation day came, I walked across the stage with my mother's college ring on a chain around my neck and Grandma's voice in my heart. I had done it. Graduated with honors despite everything. As I accepted my diploma, I looked out at the audience where Jess and Aiden were cheering wildly, holding up a sign that read, "Erica Thompson, Certified Badass." I landed an entry-level position at a local accounting firm shortly after graduation. The salary wasn't impressive, but it was stable, something I'd craved my entire life. I rented a slightly better apartment, bought secondhand furniture, and slowly built a routine. Dating was complicated. I had a few short relationships, but my trust issues always surfaced eventually. When I was 25, I met Mark, different from my high school boyfriend, at a work conference. He was patient and kind, but after 6 months together, he grew frustrated with my emotional walls. "It's like you're always waiting for me to leave," he said during our breakup conversation. "I can't compete with ghosts, Erica." He wasn't wrong. I was always braced for abandonment, always holding part of myself back. It wasn't until I started therapy at 26 that I began to understand how deeply my father's desertion had shaped me. My current boyfriend David is different. We met through Aiden at a trivia night, bonding over our shared love of obscure history facts. On our 3rd date, I told him everything about my past, expecting the usual pitying look. Instead, he was quietly thoughtful. "Thank you for trusting me with that," he said simply. "Whenever you're ready to talk more about it, I'm here. No pressure." For the first time, I found myself in a relationship where my past wasn't treated as damaged goods, but as part of what made me who I am. David understood that healing isn't linear, that some days were harder than others, and that trust would come slowly. I was building a modest but stable life, a job I was good at, a small but growing savings account, friends who were like family, and a relationship based on mutual respect. I was even considering applying to graduate school. Then came the phone call that would upend everything. I was at work when my cell phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in years. Dad's number. My heart raced as I answered. "Hello?" But it wasn't Dad's voice that replied. It was Stephanie's. "Erica, this is Stephanie, your father's wife." Her voice was strained, formal. I gripped my desk, suddenly dizzy. "Yes, I know who you are. I'm calling because—" There was a pause, a deep breath. "James had a heart attack yesterday morning. He didn't make it. I thought you should know. The words hit me like physical blows. Dad. Heart attack. Didn't make it. He's dead, I asked stupidly, needing to hear it confirmed. Yes. The funeral is this Saturday in San Francisco. I'll text you the details if you want to come. If I want to come. As if attending my own father's funeral was optional, like a casual dinner invitation. I'll be there, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. After hanging up, I sat frozen at my desk. The grief I felt was complicated, not for the father I'd known these past 22 years, but for the one I'd had for those first 5 years of my life, and for all the possibilities that would never be realized. I booked a flight that evening using most of my meager savings. David offered to come with me, but I declined. This was something I needed to do alone. Landing in San Francisco was surreal. I'd never been to California before, never seen the place that had been more important to my father than I was. I checked into a budget hotel near the airport and took an Uber to the address Stephanie had texted. The house was stunning, a sprawling modern structure in an exclusive neighborhood with views of the bay, the kind of place where every room probably had a purpose, like a media room or a home office. The kind of place that made our small Wisconsin house look like a shack in comparison. A housekeeper answered the door and led me to a large living room where people were gathered in small groups speaking in hushed tones. I recognized Stephanie immediately from social media, still beautiful at 50 with perfectly highlighted hair and an expensive black dress. Beside her stood a young man who had to be Zach, now 19, the spitting image of Dad. And next to him was Lily, 16, tall and poised. Stephanie spotted me and made her way over, her expression carefully neutral. Erica, thank you for coming. She air-kissed near my cheek. These are James's children, Zach and Lily. His children, not my siblings. The distinction was clear. Zach gave me a curt nod. Lily smiled uncertainly. Hi, she said. I've seen pictures of you. That surprised me. You have... Dad kept some old photos in his study. Before she could say more, Stephanie interrupted. The service starts in an hour. There's coffee and snacks in the dining room. I wandered through the house feeling like an intruder. Photos of the family, Dad, Stephanie, Zach, and Lily, adorned every wall. Family vacations, graduations, holidays. 22 years of moments I wasn't part of. At one point, I overheard two women whispering. Who's that young woman in the navy dress? Apparently, she's James's daughter from his first marriage, the one in Wisconsin. I didn't know he had another daughter. Neither did most people. She didn't grow up with him. The funeral service was elegant and impersonal. Colleagues spoke about Dad's professional accomplishments, his golf handicap, his community service. Stephanie gave a tearful speech about their 22 years together. Zach and Lily each shared childhood memories. I sat in the back row, a stranger at my own father's funeral, wondering if anyone would acknowledge my existence. No one did. At the reception afterward, I was sipping water in a corner when a gray-haired man approached me. You must be Erica, he said kindly. I'm Walter Richards, your father's lawyer and friend. I nodded, grateful for the simple recognition. I'm sorry for your loss, he continued. James spoke of you, you know. Not often, but he did. I wasn't sure how to respond to that. Was I supposed to be grateful that my father occasionally remembered I existed? There's a reading of the will tomorrow at my office, Walter said, handing me a business card. 10 a.m. You should be there. I was surprised. Me? Why? Because you're named in it, he said simply before being called away by another guest. That night in my hotel room, I called David and broke down crying. It's so weird, I sobbed. I'm grieving for someone who was basically a stranger. Why does it hurt so much? Because he was your dad, David said gently. And because there's always going to be that little girl inside you who waited by the window for him to come back. The next morning, I arrived at Walter's downtown office wearing the only business attire I'd packed, a simple black dress. Stephanie, Zach, and Lily were already there, along with a man Walter introduced as Stephanie's lawyer. Now that everyone's here, let's begin, Walter said, opening a folder. This is the last will and testament of James Edward Thompson. Most of the legal language washed over me. Dad had been wealthy, much wealthier than I'd imagined. The bulk of his estate, including the house and investments, went to Stephanie. Substantial trust funds were established for Zach and Lily. Then Walter cleared his throat. To my daughter, Erica Sarah Thompson, I leave the sum of $250,000 and my mother's property at Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. I gasped. $250,000. A house I hadn't even known Dad owned property in Wisconsin. Stephanie's reaction was immediate and volcanic. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "That girl wasn't part of this family for over 20 years. She barely knew James." "Mrs. Thompson," Walter said firmly, "this was your husband's explicit wish." "He wasn't thinking clearly," she insisted. "He changed this part of the will 3 years ago during that health scare. It was guilt, nothing more." Walter turned to me. "The Lake Geneva property was your grandmother's, your father's mother's. When she passed 15 years ago, James inherited it but never sold it. It's small but on the water, worth about $150,000. My head was spinning. Dad had kept his mother's house all these years, and now it was mine. As we left the office, Stephanie cornered me in the hallway, her lawyer hovering nearby. "Listen to me," she hissed. "James only included you out of misplaced guilt. You were never part of our lives. You don't deserve this." I found my voice at last. "And where was this concern when I was 5 and he left me? Where was it when Grandma and I could barely afford groceries while he was buying new cars for your kids?" Her eyes narrowed. "We will contest this. Don't think for a minute that you'll get a penny." I returned to Wisconsin the next day, emotionally drained but with a strange sense of vindication. Dad had remembered me after all, even if it took his death for me to discover it. 1 week after I returned from California, a certified letter arrived at my apartment. It was from Stephanie's lawyer formally contesting the will on grounds that I had been estranged from the deceased and that he had made the bequest under duress or due to diminished capacity. My hands shook as I read it. The letter concluded by suggesting I consider a settlement rather than engage in costly litigation. It was a thinly veiled threat. Stephanie had the resources for a legal battle. I didn't. I called the only lawyer I knew, my friend Jess's mother, who specialized in real estate law. She referred me to Karen Wilson, an estate attorney with a reputation for taking on difficult cases. "I can't afford much," I warned when I called Attorney Wilson. "Come in for a consultation," she said. "We'll figure something out." Karen Wilson was a formidable woman in her 50s with short silver hair and penetrating eyes. I told her everything. Dad's abandonment, the years with Grandma, the contested will. "Here's the truth," she said after listening. "Contesting a will is expensive and often unsuccessful, especially when the deceased's intentions are clear. Stephanie knows this. She's hoping to intimidate you into settling for less." "Can she win?" I asked. "It's possible, but unlikely. Being estranged doesn't invalidate an inheritance, particularly when the estrangement was initiated by the deceased, not the heir. And from what you've told me, there's no evidence your father was under duress or mentally compromised." I bit my lip. "I can't afford a lengthy court battle." Karen smiled slightly. "Let me worry about that. I'll take your case on contingency. I only get paid if you win." The following week, I received another package from Walter Richards. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name written in unfamiliar handwriting. "This was with your father's will," Walter's note explained. "He asked that it be given to you privately." With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and unfolded a letter dated 3 years earlier. "Dear Erica, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and there are things I never had the courage to say to you in life. I know no apology can make up for my absence in your life. I failed you in ways I can never repair, and for that I am deeply sorry. The truth is, after your mother died, I was broken. When I met Stephanie, she represented an escape from my grief, a fresh start. I told myself you'd be better off with your grandmother, that I'd come back for you once I'd rebuilt my life. But days turned into months, months into years, and the longer I stayed away, the harder it became to bridge that gap. Pride, cowardice, shame, all played their part. Every year that passed made it more impossible to explain why I'd stayed away so long. So I took the coward's way out and stayed away entirely. I've kept track of you over the years through Margaret. I know about your graduation, your accounting degree, your jobs, I'm proud of the woman you've become, though I had no hand in shaping her. The inheritance I've left you is inadequate compensation for a lifetime of absence, but I hope it might give you options your mother and I never had. The lake house was where I spent summers as a boy. It's the one place that holds happy memories for me, and I've kept it all these years hoping someday to share it with you. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, so I won't. I only want you to know that my failure as your father reflects my own weaknesses, not any lack of worth on your part. With deepest regrets, Dad. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. It answered questions I'd carried my entire life but opened new wounds too. He'd known all along, where I was, what I was doing. He'd been proud of me from afar, but never bothered to tell me to my face. I showed the letter to Karen, who nodded grimly. This strengthens our case considerably. It shows he was of sound mind and had clear intentions regarding your inheritance. A week later, we received notice that a mediation had been scheduled. Karen explained that this was standard procedure before a will contest went to court. Stephanie's lawyer likely advised her that her chances are slim, she added. This mediation is her opportunity to save face while negotiating. The mediation took place in a conference room at Karen's firm. Stephanie arrived with an aggressive-looking attorney and surprisingly both Zach and Lily. Stephanie was a study in calculated grief, designer black outfit, subtle makeup tissues clutched in manicured hands. Her lawyer opened with a speech about James's real family and how the last-minute changes to his will didn't reflect his true wishes. Ms. Thompson has been absent from her father's life for over 2 decades, he argued. This bequest was clearly made out of misplaced guilt, not genuine intent. Karen smiled thinly. My client didn't choose to be absent from her father's life. She was 5 years old when he abandoned her to start a new family with your client. If we're discussing intentions, perhaps we should address why Mr. Thompson felt such guilt in the first place. The discussion grew heated. Financial records were presented, arguments made about fairness and intent. Through it all, Zach glared at me resentfully, while Lily looked increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, Stephanie's lawyer proposed a settlement, $25,000 and no claim to the lake house. That's less than 10% of what my client is entitled to, Karen countered. It's generous considering the circumstances, Stephanie snapped. Something in me snapped. 22 years of feeling unwanted, invisible, less than, all of it crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. You know what's not generous? I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Leaving your 5-year-old daughter with her grandmother and never coming back. Making promises you never intended to keep. Having so much while we had so little. I reached into my bag and pulled out a worn birthday card, the last one Dad had sent when I was 8. I slid it across the table. This is the last birthday card my father ever gave me. $20 and a promise to visit soon. I kept it because I thought that promise meant something. I turned to Zach and Lily. Did you know that while Dad was buying you cars and taking you on vacations, my grandmother was working extra jobs with arthritis just so I could get school supplies? Did you know we had to skip meals at the end of some months? Did you know that when my grandmother had a stroke, I worked 3 jobs while finishing high school to take care of her? Lily's eyes were wide, filled with tears. Even Zach looked shaken. I'm not asking for what isn't mine, I continued. I'm asking for exactly what my father wanted me to have. Not out of greed, but because for once in my life he actually thought of me. And I won't let you take that away. The room fell silent. Stephanie's lawyer cleared his throat, clearly reassessing his strategy. Karen seized the moment. My client has a letter written by James Thompson himself explaining his reasons for the bequest. It makes his intentions quite clear. If this goes to court, that letter becomes public record. Stephanie paled slightly. After a tense discussion, her lawyer proposed a new settlement, $150,000 and no claim to the house. Karen looked at me. I shook my head. All or nothing, I said firmly. What my father intended. The mediation ended without resolution, but 2 days later, Stephanie's lawyer called Karen with news they were dropping the contest. The full inheritance would be mine with one condition. I would never contact Stephanie or Zach again. Lily wasn't mentioned in this stipulation. The judge approved the will as written. $250,000 and a small lake house I'd never seen were now mine. It was surreal. More money than I'd ever imagined having, yet it couldn't buy back what I'd truly wanted: a father who stayed. The first time I visited the lake house, it was early spring. The small A-frame cabin sat on a wooded lot, its weathered dock extending into the clear waters of Lake Geneva. Though neglected for years, the structure was sound: 2 bedrooms, a rustic kitchen, a stone fireplace, and a screened porch overlooking the water. I wandered through the rooms, trying to imagine my father as a boy spending summers here. In the larger bedroom, I found a cedar chest tucked in the closet. Inside were photo albums and mementos I'd never seen. There was my mother, young and radiant in her wedding dress. There was baby me cradled in Dad's arms, his face alight with pride. There were photos of my first steps, my second birthday, ordinary moments I had no memory of. At the bottom of the chest was a small wooden box. Inside was a collection of my school photos, one from each year, kindergarten through high school graduation, cards I'd made as a child, a newspaper clipping about my high school academic awards, evidence that somehow from a distance he had been watching. Tucked beside them was a leather-bound journal. I hesitated before opening it, feeling like an intruder in my father's private thoughts. But I needed answers more than I needed to respect his privacy now. The journal entries spanned the last 5 years of his life. Many were mundane: work stress, golf scores, home repairs. But scattered throughout were references to me. Saw on Facebook that Erica graduated college today. Wanted to call. But what would I say after all this time? Margaret says she's applying for accounting jobs. Like father, like daughter, I guess. Proud of her for doing it without any help from me. Margaret had another stroke. Considered reaching out to Erica, but Stephanie thinks it's better not to disrupt her life now. Sent extra money to Margaret's account. Hope it helps. Had a health scare last week. Made me think about what matters. Changed my will to include Erica. Should have done it years ago. Too much of my life has been about appearances and not enough about doing what's right. The entries revealed a man trapped by his own choices, too proud or ashamed to reach back across the gulf he'd created, yet never quite able to forget the daughter he'd left behind. It wasn't the explanation I'd wanted, but it was the closest to understanding him I would ever get. I closed the journal, overwhelmed with conflicting emotions: anger, grief, a strange kind of pity, and something that wasn't quite forgiveness, but perhaps its distant cousin. That evening, sitting on the dock watching the sunset, I called David. As always, he listened without judgment as I processed my discoveries. "What are you going to do with the house?" he asked when I finished. "I think I'll keep it," I replied, surprising myself. "Renovate it, maybe. It feels like reclaiming something." "And the money?" I'd been thinking about that too. "I'm going to create a scholarship fund in Grandma Margaret's name for students raised by grandparents. And I'm putting some aside for graduate school. The rest, I'll invest." 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected email from an unfamiliar address: lily.thompson02@gmail.com. "Dear Erica," it read, "I hope it's okay that I'm writing to you. I got your email from Dad's contacts. I can't stop thinking about what you said at the mediation. I had no idea about your life with your grandmother. Mom doesn't want me contacting you, but I'm 16 now and can make my own decisions. I'd like to know my half-sister if you're open to that. No pressure either way." I hesitated before responding. Did I want to connect with the family that had replaced me? But Lily had done nothing wrong. She was just a kid born into circumstances not of her making, just like me. "I'd like that too," I wrote back. "Maybe we could video chat sometime." Our first conversation was awkward but genuine. Lily was intelligent and thoughtful, curious about the aunt she'd barely known existed. Unlike Zach, who had fully embraced Stephanie's narrative about me, Lily had questions. "Dad had a photo of you on his desk," she confided. "Way in the back behind the others. I asked about it once and he got this sad look and said you were his daughter from before. Mom got mad when she overheard and said you weren't part of our family anymore. I never understood why." Over the next few months, Lily and I built a cautious relationship through texts and video calls. She visited the lake house once, telling Stephanie she was staying with a friend. We spent a weekend getting to know each other, finding surprising similarities despite our different upbringings. The inheritance allowed me to make changes I'd only dreamed of before. I enrolled in a part-time MBA program while continuing to work. I hired contractors to renovate the lake house, preserving its character while updating its systems. Each decision felt like an affirmation. I was building something for myself, not just surviving. David proposed at the lake house that fall after helping me paint the living room. It wasn't a grand gesture, just the two of us covered in paint splatters surrounded by drop cloths. But it was perfect. He understood that this place represented both loss and reclamation for me. I thought about doing this somewhere fancy, he admitted. But this place matters to you. I want to be part of the good memories you make here. Therapy remained an essential part of my healing journey. My therapist helped me understand that forgiveness wasn't about excusing Dad's actions, but about freeing myself from the weight of resentment. Your father made choices that hurt you deeply, she explained. You can acknowledge that hurt while choosing not to let it define your future. Stephanie maintained her bitterness. When she learned about my contact with Lily, she sent a threatening email about legal consequences if I interfered with her family. I forwarded it to Karen, who assured me that as Lily was initiating the contact and was nearly an adult, there was little Stephanie could do. Zach remained distant, fully aligned with his mother's perspective. I made peace with the fact that some relationships might never be possible. The following spring, David and I married at the renovated lake house. It was a small ceremony with our closest friends. Jess was my maid of honor. Aiden was David's best man. Lily came against her mother's wishes, bringing a rare photo of my mother holding me as a baby. I found it in Dad's things, she explained. I thought you should have it. We placed a framed photo of Grandma Margaret in a place of honor at the ceremony. She was the one who had truly been my parent, who had shown me what unconditional love looked like. As I stood with David exchanging vows against the backdrop of the lake that had somehow connected the broken pieces of my history, I felt Grandma's presence strongly. I could almost hear her voice. Your worth is not determined by who stays or who leaves. I understand now what she meant. Dad's abandonment shaped me, but it doesn't define me. The inheritance he left cannot make up for 22 years of absence, but it gave me something unexpected: closure, and the means to build the life I choose. The little girl who waited by the window still lives inside me, but she's no longer alone. She has a family now, not the one she was born into, but the one she created through love, friendship, and resilience. I've learned that family isn't just blood. It's Grandma Margaret sacrificing everything to raise me. It's Jess and Aiden standing by me through my darkest times. It's David loving me patiently as I learn to trust. It's even Lily reaching across the divide to know her sister. The scholarship fund in Grandma's name now helps 3 students a year. Each time I meet a new recipient, I see echoes of my own story. Children being raised by grandparents, navigating loss but finding strength. I still visit Grandma's grave every month, bringing fresh flowers and updates on my life. You were right, I tell her. I am stronger than I knew. As for Dad, I've come to accept that he was a flawed man who made choices he later regretted but couldn't find the courage to rectify. The inheritance was his inadequate attempt at amends. I've chosen to use it to honor the woman who never left me and to build a future based on love rather than absence. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after profound disappointment or loss? How did you find the strength to move forward? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to join me for more conversations about resilience and rebuilding. And remember, our worth isn't determined by who stays or leaves our lives, but by the love we choose to give and the person we choose to become. Thank you for listening, and I wish you peace on your own journey of healing.